Third game we have to talk about, we have number 10th ranked Ole Miss, 6-1, going on the road to take on 5-2 Auburn, who currently is ranked 18th in the nation. This game is going to take place 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. Auburn is a 3-point favorite in this game, and I understand why Auburn is a favorite in this game. There were a lot of Ole Miss fans who were a little bit, confused of why Ole Miss wasn't a favorite to win this game, and I think the reason for that is because Ole Miss run defense hasn't been good this year. Their defense hasn't been good overall as a whole, even though their defense finally decided to show up last week when they defeated LSU, and they defeated LSU by a pretty comfortable margin. They held them to 77 rushing yards and 326 total yards of offense. The question is, are you going to be able to replicate that performance this week against Auburn? Now, one thing about Auburn is that Auburn doesn't have a lot of explosive playmakers on the outside. Auburn mostly does their damage on the ground with the talented halfbacks they have, led by Tank Bigsby. And I believe that Tank Bigsby could be in for a very big game against this Ole Miss defense. So Ole Miss defense that outside of that LSU game has gotten gashed by pretty much every single opponent they played this year, has had success running the football some way, some fashion against this Ole Miss defense. But when you look at Auburn, okay, you don't really have that much that you have to game plan for if you're the DC for Ole Miss, because I don't really think none of Auburn's wide receivers are going to scare you. Okay, but you do have to account for the running backs and Tank Bigsby with how great he is, especially when it comes to breaking through tackles and what he does after initial contact. You also got to worry about Bo Nix. Bo Nix has played pretty solid this year. He's had some ups and downs, but he is coming off one of his better performances against Arkansas. He was 21-26. 292 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, through an interception. He's also really good when it comes to extending plays and giving these wide receivers some more time to get open. So for Ole Miss, I think a really big factor is going to be, can you keep Bo Nix inside the pocket? Can you force him to beat you inside of the pocket versus getting outside the pocket, extending plays? Because when he gets outside the pocket, I think he's pretty good at times. I actually think that he's a lot better outside the pocket than inside the pocket, which is something that you don't really say about when it comes to the majority of quarterbacks in this world, because when a lot of quarterbacks get outside the pocket, they kind of can have things go awry. But Bo Nix is pretty good under chaos, which is really weird. I think that's when he's at his best, when things aren't going right. He has to improvise. So I think if you're the DC for Ole Miss, it's really important that you contain Bo Nix and also don't allow him to be a factor in the ground game. Now, what's really interesting is going to be the battle of the fourth down, because you have Ole Miss, who is 7th in fourth down conversion percentage. They convert on fourth down 79.17% of the time. And Auburn has the 9th best fourth down defense in the nation. They only allow teams to convert on fourth down 23.8% of the time. And normally you think about the third down battle and things like that. But Ole Miss, with Lane Kiffin at the helm at head coach, he goes for it on fourth down a pretty good amount of times. It goes by how the floor of the game is, what area of the field they're on, and also he takes analytics into account and things like that. So I think that's going to be a really big focal point, because if you're Auburn, if you can get Ole Miss to not convert on fourth down, you're able to get a stop, then that is a good thing, because that means that, they are going to be off the field with no points. Now, Auburn's offense is going to be able to put up some points this year, and I know I like to take a lot of shots at Bo Nix because, I haven't really been the highest on Bo Nix, but he has had some pretty solid performances. And I think against his Ole Miss defense, even despite the fact that, Auburn doesn't have a lot of dynamic, explosive playmakers on the perimeter, I still feel like he could be in for a pretty solid day passing. Even though I do expect him to have a turnover or two overall, I think he should have a pretty good game. Now, Brian Harsin, the head coach for Auburn, talked about in his presser about Matt Corral. He thinks that Matt Corral is the front runner for the Heisman Trophy, and he has, a huge likeness for Matt Corral. So that pretty much tells us that his game plan, at least when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, is going to be, okay, how is Auburn going to game plan to try to slow down Matt Corral? Because number 2 is the motor behind that offense. And I don't really think there's a way that you can stop Matt Corral. I haven't really seen him have a bad game yet this season. But the offensive line for Ole Miss kind of is a little bit of a question mark, really. And I think if Auburn can get some consistent pressure on Matt Corral, I think that could play a factor into it. Because when you look at Ole Miss, their offensive line isn't bad, but I definitely feel like there is a lot of room for improvement there. But they're also really good when it comes to how they scheme up their route combinations and things like that. So I also feel like if you're Auburn on the defensive side of football, you gotta have great communication, because there are a lot of times this season where I've seen a lot of secondaries that go against this Ole Miss offense. They get lost in their assignments, or they run the wrong coverage, or they have a blown coverage due to miscommunication. So everybody on that Auburn defense has to be on the same page. And on top of that, he's also a threat to run with the ball as well. He's really good when he pulls the football down. There was one game, I forgot what game it was, he ran the ball like 30 times, and he's also kind of banged up. He played last week against LSU despite the injury that he was playing through and not being 100%. He still balled out really good. So I just wonder just how healthy is Matt Corral going to be in this game. Now, the red zone offense for Ole Miss is 47th in college football. So when Ole Miss gets inside the red zone territory, they're pretty much going to score, because Auburn has the worst, or one of the worst, red zone defenses in all of college football. They're 122nd in that department. So for Auburn, their red zone defense has to improve this game, but I doubt that it will, because it hasn't been there all year. And late in the season, you pretty much are what you are. There's nothing really misleading at this point. There's nothing really that's going to improve. So for Auburn, you probably got to try to keep Ole Miss outside of the red zone, or at least, try to get them into a situation where on 4th down, you have the opportunity to get off the field, get them to those 4th down situations, because then Ole Miss, more times than not, is going to choose to go for it. And if you're able to stop them on 4th down, then they pretty much go into the red zone and score no points. So that's why I alluded to that 4th down defense, the battle of the 4th down offense of Ole Miss versus the 4th down defense of Auburn being a really important deciding factor in this game. I'm going to take Ole Miss to win this game, and I'm going to take them to cover. And the reason why I'm going to take them to win this game is because I don't really trust Auburn's defense in this game. I don't really trust their secondary all that much. Even though, I believe that one of the wide receivers for Ole Miss is kind of banged up, one of their better wide receivers. He's currently listed as questionable in this game. I still feel like Ole Miss is going to find a way with Matt Corral at the helm at quarterback to be able to put some points up. And with Bo Nix, he's going to have a couple of plays when he gives the ball up and things like that. You kind of just take the good with the bad when it comes to Bo Nix at this point. But even though Ole Miss run defense isn't all that great, I still feel like what's going to decide this game is going to be the fact that the red zone offense for Auburn hasn't been great that year, so far this season. And when you look at Ole Miss, I think when they get inside the 20, more times than not, they're going to be able to punch it in on this Auburn defense, which is why I'm going to take Ole Miss to get the victory. So you guys let me know if you guys are watching this on YouTube, who you guys have winning this game down in the comment section down below, and make sure that if you are still listening to this, that you check out the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts. Link to it is down in the description down below.